Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something you've probably heard tossed around. The idea of white being a recessive gene.
Right, especially when talking about hair or skin color.
Exactly. And it sort of connects basic genetics, dominant versus recessive to things we see every day, and even touches on bigger ideas about, well, identity.
It does. We all kind of get the basics. Dominant traits pop up easily. Recessive ones need 2 copies of the gene.
But how does that really apply to the huge range of human skin and hair colors? And why does white often get tagged as recessive?
That's what we're digging into. We want to get past the simple labels and look at the genetics, specifically focusing on a molecule called melanin.
Melanin. Okay, so that's the key player here.
Absolutely. Melanin is the pigment behind our skin, hair, and eye color. But it's not just one thing. Think of it more like a group of related molecules.
So different types of melanin.
Precisely. The main ones for us are eumelanin and pheomelanin. Eumelanin gives you the browns and blacks.
Okay, the darker shades.
Yeah, and pheomelanin is responsible for reds and yellows.
Got it.
Now, when we talk about a white appearance, like very light skin or hair, it's usually linked to having much less eumelanin.
So a lack of that dark pigment.
Right. The clearest example is albinism. People with albinism have genetic variations, meaning they produce very little melanin overall, that results in that very light or white look.
Okay, so melanin is the pigment. Less dark melanin leads towards white. How do genes actually control this?
Well, genes are the instruction manual, right? They tell our bodies how to build the things needed to make melanin specifically, the enzymes involved in the process.
Enzymes, the little worker molecules.
Exactly. And we get 2 copies of each gene, one from mom, one from dad. These copies, called alleles, can have slight differences.
Like different instructions in the manual.
Perfect analogy. So you might have one allele that says make lots of eumelanin and another that says make very little, or maybe even codes for a non-working enzyme.
Right. And this is where dominant and recessive come in.
You got it. Generally, an allele that codes for a working enzyme to make eumelanin the dark pigment tends to be dominant. Meaning if you inherit just 1 copy of that working allele, your body can usually make a good amount of eumelanin. You'll likely have darker skin or hair. That one strong instruction often overrides the effect of a weaker or non-functional allele on the other copy.
So one go signal for dark pigment is often enough?
Often, yes. Now think about those alleles that lead to enzymes that don't work well, or at all, in making eumelanin.
The less active ones.
Right. For someone to have that very light white appearance because they lack melanin, like in certain types of albinism, they usually need to inherit 2 copies of these less active alleles.
One from each parent again.
Exactly. And that's the core of recessive inheritance here. The lack of dark pigment only shows up when both gene copies are the less active form. If you have even 1 dominant functional copy, it can usually compensate.
Ah, I see. So white, in this genetic sense, isn't an active instruction to be white. It's more the result of not having the instructions to produce much dark pigment.
That's a great way to put it. It's the outcome when the dominant make eumelanin instruction isn't strongly present from either parent for that specific gene function.
Okay, that clarifies the white as recessive idea in this context. But then why don't we just say black is the dominant gene if making dark pigment is dominant?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it points to the complexity. While making eumelanin is often dominant in the way we described, the actual degree of darkness, getting to very dark or black skin and hair, isn't controlled by a single black gene overpowering a single white gene.
Ah, so it's not a simple switch.
Not at all. Human skin and hair color is what we call a polygenic trait.
Polygenic, meaning many genes.
Exactly. Many different genes interact to determine the final amount and type of melanin produced. Think of it less like one switch and more like a whole mixing board with lots of controls.
Okay, multiple dials influencing the shade.
Right. So achieving very dark skin or hair, what society might label black, is often the result of inheriting multiple dominant alleles across different genes, all of which contribute to boosting eumelanin production.
So it's like a cumulative effect. More make dark pigment instructions add up.
Precisely. It's the combined effect of these various dominant gene versions, rather than one single black gene winning out over a recessive white one. Genes like MC1R, ACP, and others all play a part in this complex regulation.
That makes so much more sense. It's not black versus white genes, but a whole system regulating pigment levels where functional often means more pigment and tends to be dominant, and less functional needs two copies to really show up as very light.
You've nailed it. The white appearance tied to low melanin often follows recessive patterns because you need two copies of the less functional alleles. Darker colors, including black, typically result from the combined additive effects of multiple genes promoting eumelanin.
So this genetic understanding gives us the biological basis for color variation. But you mentioned identity earlier. How does this biological picture connect with how people think about race? It feels like there's a bit of a jump there.
There is, because race is much more than just biology. But, discussions about race inevitably involve skin color, which we now know is down to melanin genetics.
Right.
And sometimes people feel a strong connection to a racial or ethnic identity that might not align perfectly with how society perceives their biological traits based on appearance. We occasionally hear the term transracial in these discussions, though it's a very complex and debated concept.
Yeah, I've seen discussions around figures like Rachel Dolezal, for instance.
Right.
He raises questions about identity versus biology versus social experience.
It does, and you even see online communities like one mentioned on Reddit where people might identify differently from their perceived background and sometimes use things like makeup or hair dye to align their appearance more closely with the identity they feel.
So altering appearance to match an internal sense of identity.
Right. But it's important to remember from a purely biological standpoint we've discussed today, altering appearance doesn't change the underlying genetics of melanin production you were born with.
That distinction is crucial. The genetics are the genetics, even if appearance or identity expression changes.
Exactly. The social categories of race are built on far more than just melanin genes. They involve culture, history, lived experience, societal perception. It's incredibly layered.
Okay, so let's wrap this part up. The key takeaway on the genetics seems to be that white appearance, in the context of melanin deficiency like albinism, often results from recessive inheritance needing two copies of less active melanin production genes.
Correct. While darker colors, including black, are typically the result of the cumulative additive effects of multiple genes, often involving dominant alleles that promote eumelanin synthesis. It's polygenic.
It really highlights how the biological basis for color is complex, but the social meaning we attach to these colors' race is another layer entirely.
A very important distinction to keep making.
Absolutely. This has been really fascinating, clarifying how those simple dominant recessive labels apply, and importantly, how they don't apply in a simplistic way to human color. It leaves you thinking, though, if we understand the biology of color this way, how should that shape our understanding of identity? Especially when someone's internal identity doesn't seem to match their biological traits. What are the implications?
That's the big question, isn't it? Definitely food for thought.
Indeed. Thanks for exploring this complex topic with us on The Deep Dive.